Hello, Dr. Clay and fellow classmates. This is my EDL 853 Modulate case study, Get This Child Out of My Room, and I'm Rick Hall. In summary, Carl Hughes is a student with an IEP. He goes to a small district Schuyler K-12 comprehensive school. They're part of a cooperative that has support from a special education cooperative because they're so large. Susan Green is the new special ed teacher in the district. Mrs. Green is replacing a well thought of and retiring teacher that had worked at the school. Carl's new teacher, Mrs. Taylor, comes to Mrs. Green and wants him out of the classroom due to his behavior. Carl's home life is in chaos due to his parents' divorce. Susan has discussed this issue with Mrs. Wills, who's the district coordinator for special education. She's talked to the superintendent and got permission to have a new IEP. The superintendent tells her that she needs to set up a meeting. Mrs. Green, the new special ed teacher, is attempting to set up a meeting, has a hard time contacting the parents, and finally gets a hold of the mother. One thing's for sure, one thing that we do know is the current IEP is not working. The parents' divorce seems to be impacting Carl's behavior. Mrs. Taylor does not agree with the current IEP, and she wants Carl out of the classroom. She just is pretty adamant about that. She feels threatened, physically threatened in the classroom because of his actions. The school and the special education administration support the development of a new IEP. They have a meeting, and both parents show up, and it's obvious between their interactions that it's not good. Carl's mother's very frustrated and at one point breaks down in tears. And when Miss Susan talks to Carl about it, he doesn't want to admit or doesn't say anything about what's going on causing his actions. So those are the things that I do know. What I need to know, category 1B, is I need to review the specifics of the old plan to make sure I understand what had been done before. Identify adults in the building that might be able to assist with Carl. Ask Mrs. Taylor and other teachers if his disruptive behavior has been documented. Excuse me, check on the training level, the professional development that's been given around IEPs and special education. Need to figure out how Susan can get Mrs. Taylor's support in the new IEP, and what I can do or what Mrs. Green, Susan can do to support Mrs. Taylor in the classroom, because it's very important that she does support Mrs. Taylor in her concerns with Carl in the classroom. Identify the problems, category 1. Carl's parental divorce is affecting his behavior. Their attitude toward each other certainly rubs off on children very easily. Do Carl's actions present a safety hazard to teachers and other students? What in his current IEP that he has before the new one, what kind of interventions may have worked before with Carl? Mrs. Taylor wants Carl out of her classroom, and she seems unwilling to support the current IEP. Carl's parents are more wrapped up in their problems and not concerned about his or his siblings. It's obvious that Carl's educational and emotional needs are not being met currently. Need to figure out how those can be met. And also, what can Susan do to better support Mrs. Taylor in the classroom in supporting Carl and the new IEP? The action plan going forward is to have a meeting with Mrs. Taylor to get her input. I think Mrs. Taylor's first interaction with Susan was kind of an emotional thing, so try to have a more calm and detailed meeting about what Mrs. Taylor thinks can be going on. Need to review the current IEP with Mrs. Taylor and help her to understand that law and regulations dictate that he can't just be pulled out of the classroom and put in a room by himself. You need to define and write the new behavior plan with input from all the key players, Mrs. Taylor, parents, administration. You need to sit down with Carl and interview him and set up some counseling to help him with his personal issues, help him. And to me, the biggest thing, and I've seen this before in kids in my regular classroom, when the parents are having problems, sometimes the kids blame themselves. So for me, it would be key to help Carl understand that his parents' issues are not his fault. Review the new game plan with Carl and his parents, and then make sure that all staff is informed of the new behavior strategies and support for Carl going forward. Promoting success for Carl, the bottom line is what do we need to do to make sure that Carl, what's best for him. He's got to be very clearly taught that his actions have consequences, both positive and negative. Mrs. Taylor needs to be reminded that it is a law and regulation that Carl have the least restrictive environment in his classroom, and then take this opportunity and use Carl as an example for the entire staff to remind them of the laws and regulations around special education. It's important for Susan to support Mrs. Taylor as much as she can to try to get her on her side, understanding the importance of Carl, and make sure that the administration supports so that the new IEP will be successful. Need to implement the new IEP plan and maintain communication among the parties to make any adjustments or changes going forward that will, again, what's best for Carl. The problem debrief, some of my thoughts was, is Carl's parents' issues really the the baseline for what's causing his interactions? It's important for Carl at the same time to know that Mrs. Taylor feels safe in her classroom. One thing we need to do is see if there's any kind of additional support services for Carl and his family. And the staff needs to be reminded through professional development that just because the former special ed teacher did things a certain way, and this is kind of a touchy thing. You'd have to do it with kid gloves, and it's hard for a new teacher to come in any situation and take over for a person that's been there for a long time. Let them know that I'm the teacher now, and we're going to do it my way, and we're going to follow the rules and regulations, and we're going to do what's best for Carl, regardless of what may have happened in the past. That's a really touchy thing you have to be careful with, especially in small schools, because staff tends to stay there for a long time. Category 4, while I was feeling when I was reading this case study is I was kind of surprised at Mrs. Taylor's attitude. I was concerned about Carl's personal issues, his life. Anytime a child has, a divorce with the parents or problems at home, it affects them. And it seems like that children let those things affect them more than what an adult would. I would feel optimistic about helping Carl and sitting down and counseling and making sure that he gets support to realize that his parents' issues aren't his issues. What I was thinking about was how to be a better special education teacher, how to best support Mrs. Taylor in the classroom, trying to understand the things that are causing Carl to have these issues. And then, again, top of my list would be to help Carl understand that he's not to blame for his parents' problems. The thing that I valued most in this case study would be all the different professionals that Mrs. Green would have to lean on and to support. I think her commitment, most people who work in special education have a special love and kindness and soft heart for these special ed kids, and the commitment to help them is very high. And I would value the professionalism of other teachers to help Carl in this situation as well. Unresolved, needing further investigation. Certainly have to find out what kind of resources, even outside the school, that we could get to support his home situation. What kind of additional training the staff might need to help. I think a big thing, and I ran across this when I was a basketball coach my first year that I coached, I had it was in a little school down southern Arkansas, so I had 12 players on my team, and 10 of them were black, and of those 10 black players, not a single one of them had a father at home. So we kind of butted heads at time because they weren't used to having a male order them around. I mean, especially a white male. But I think one of the things that could be found was a stable and good, caring male member that can help Carl at the school. And will the new behavior plan actually help Carl? I mean, you need to track it and make sure that improvement's being made. Promoting the academic success and personal well-being for every student. Component 1 is ensuring that Carl's behavior is not a detriment to other students. Carl's IEP plan needs to be adhered to and provide consistent and coordinated support, especially with young kids. The one thing that you need to be is consistent with them. Component 2, student well-being, trust and cooperation among staff. I mean, bottom line is, and I do this with my regular education classes, I try to make the kids know that I love them, I care about them. You know, the bottom line is, at the end of the day, if they don't remember dates about a test or things like that, it's really not important. It's the fact that I really care about them becoming successful. Making sure that the staff and are safe emotionally and physically. Carl's got to understand those consequences. And student well-being is seeking outside support for him and his family as well. Component 3, enhancing instruction, professional development for the teachers, conflict resolution training maybe, a mentor program for new teachers about helping them to understand special education and the requirements there. And also finding people in Carl's life that promote positive interactions. Like I said, a positive male member in his life will go a long way. Before I came back to teaching, I was a long-term sub for a class of first and second grade special needs kids, and I team taught with 2 other female teachers, and I really loved it. It was a great experience, and the head teacher told me one time, he says, the biggest impact you're having on them is that you're a positive male in their life, and you're kind, and you love them. So I think that's a big thing. Thank you, and that's the end of my Module 8 presentation.